Welcome, you guys. We're just going to give a few minutes for those who are going to join the live call to arrive. So I invite, if you're here on the live call and we're just waiting another moment or so, use this as an opportunity to just take a deep breath. We made it through the end of the day, not to worry about what has come before, not worrying about what's going to happen the rest of the evening, but allowing ourselves the presence to just be here for the next hour in community and conversation. Welcome to all the others joining. I'm just getting some of the details set here. So good to see you all. Thank you guys for, making us a part of your week. Rob, just want to let you know, had a couple of people reach out to me and say, I'm really excited for this conversation, but I can't be there live, so I'll be sure to catch the replay. So I know that this is an anticipated conversation and there's going to be so much wisdom to share. And so just right off the bat, Rob, thank you for sharing some of your Thursday evening, or as my girlfriend calls it, Friday Junior, with us. And, there might be a few more people that trickle on in. For those who are here, just some logistics. We're going to stop our kind of official conversation around 10 till the hour and open it up for questions. So if a question pops up and you don't want to forget it, feel free to pop it in the chat in the meantime. Otherwise, I do have some people who asked some questions just in case no one live wants to speak up, but I'm sure there'll be so much that is inspired. Hopefully we'll inspire some conversation towards the end, but just know that we're going to create the space for that as well. So with that, Rob, I would love if you would introduce yourself and share a little bit about your journey on how you became a happiness coach and why and how we can cultivate that happiness in a way to be satisfied no matter what's coming up.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love having conversations with you of all people. I'm Robert Mack. I work as a positive psychologist, really a positive psychology expert. I am a published author. I'm an executive coach. I'm a celebrity happiness coach. I write books, publish books, TV shows and host TV shows that have some kind of happiness or psychology theme. I became a happiness coach in the most difficult, challenging way probably humanly possible. Also, I think the most authentic ways is, I grew up really deeply depressed. I remember being depressed and anxious and self-loathing. Really my first memory, 6 or 7 years of age. I always thought I would grow out of it. You think you'll grow out of it. I wanted to be a professional basketball player. I thought that would solve it. I thought I'd get a girlfriend one day, that would help. But I'd have some friends and some money. And as I got older, the depression just deepened and the suicidal ideation got worse. And despite being, salutatorian in my high school class, getting a college scholarship, despite excelling in sports, cross country and baseball and football and basketball, I just felt worse and worse. And so my life got objectively better on the outside, but I felt subjectively worse for it on the inside. And I got to a place where I eventually decided I was going to do something about it. So I did some research and I decided that I was going to kill myself. And I looked up the means and methods to do so. And so I went and got a kitchen knife and I still have the suicide test marks on my arm to this day. But I dug the knife, into my wrist. And the most surprising and unexpected and unpredictable thing happened ever, which is that for seemingly no good reason, without anything in my external circumstances changing, I felt this ineffable peace and love and joy sort of wash over me. And that blew my mind, and so in that moment, I decided I was going to postpone the suicide for 5 or 10 minutes. That was it. Even that was a very tall, ambitious order. I was like, I'm not going to be able to last 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But in the 5 or 10 minutes, I started doing a different kind of research. And I started focusing more on happiness. What is happiness? And lo and behold, after many, many, many years and lots of days where it felt like 2 steps forward and 1,000 steps backward, I discovered that I could feel better, that I could become
Mm.
happier, and I became obsessed with it. And
Hmm.
for long, I found myself sharing my story with others, and even sharing little tips and tricks and things that I learned along the way. So
Yeah.
that's a long-winded way of becoming a happiness coach.
Rob, you have such an inspiring story, and one that I think highlights something really important. And you said it really beautifully a few moments ago. I wrote it down. Objectively, life was getting better. All the things I said I wanted, that I arbitrarily in my mind said, this will make me happy, this will make me fulfilled, this will be the thing that gets me to where I want to be. And I got all those check, 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 and not simple things, but you had major successes. And yet it's really easy to get confused around, but I've got all the things, so why aren't I happy? And people don't always understand that our wiring is not based on external validation, external factors, material objects, right? So how someone who maybe doesn't quite get, but I don't get it, why were you depressed and suicidal when you kind of had everything you wanted?
Yeah. Well, you can never get enough of something you never really needed. There's that.
Mm.
Uh,
You always have such good one-liners.
I don't know where they come from sometimes. Like you, I've read a lot of your one-liners more than my own. So I'd say that's the first thing. And you're right too. The brain is a beautiful problem-solving instrument, and it's just as beautiful, just as powerful, if not more so, a troublemaker. It's a problem maker.
Mm,
And so that this brain of ours is really fantastic at solving problems. That's its job. And it does an extraordinarily fantastic job at that,
yep.
even if you think it doesn't. And its job is to look for, find, and solve problems. And so when you solve a problem, when you fulfill a desire, when you reach a goal, there's a moment or two of pleasure and enjoyment. But very quickly, that brain gets back to work and begins looking for new problems to solve and to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And so before you know it, your life is mostly consumed with problems. So life becomes sort of this game of whack-a-mole. So no matter how good
Yep.
it is, you want it to get better. And no matter how good you have it, you look around and you see people that are doing better. And so there's a sort of multiple layers. I'd say the first layer though is just nature. Nature is incredible, but it's great at
Mm,
it's great at surviving, not so great at thriving. It's really designed for survival and not necessarily happiness. And
mm-hmm.
so, and we all are wired a little differently that way, as you know, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
50% of our happiness can be attributed to our wiring, to our DNA, to our sort of genetic set point. We know that based on decades of research. And unlike height or eye color, that genetic set point is malleable, it's plastic, it's changeable. That
Mm-hmm.
means if you do a few of the right things and you spend time with some of the right people and you read some of the right books and you dedicate yourself to improving your happiness, you can actually make a dramatic shift in this genetic set point. Right? So you can
Yeah.
turn on and off the DNA. So the first part is nature. The second part is nurture. I come from a family that was so loving and also so disciplined. And discipline can be fantastic. It can also be somewhat problematic if you turn that discipline against yourself and you
Yeah.
begin to use it as another weapon against yourself. So as a
Yeah.
professional,
The never enoughness, right?
totally. That was it, exactly. So yeah, both nature and nurture combined on one hand to make my life seemingly more difficult. In the end, it made it so much easier.
Yeah. Well, it made me think of this quick story I'd love to share, because I think this is, coming from my background of mindfulness and meditation and understanding some of those tenets that are rooted in Buddhist meditation practice of how do we reduce our suffering, right? And expectation is the quickest path to suffering. Attachment to a particular outcome is a quickest path to suffering, and not being present, right? Those are some of the main core tenets of where we get stuck. And I was a couple years ago, actually many years ago, in one of my most favorite places on earth. If you guys have never been, I highly recommend making the pilgrimage to Esalen in Big Sur. It is on the coast of California. It's a natural hot springs built into the cliff sides, overlooking the ocean. It's a center for higher consciousness. It's spiritual, transformative. And I used to go on many retreats. And there was one weekend I was there, and whenever I was there, I never liked to sleep very much because you could go in the hot tubs at night. And I loved being in there in the middle of the night. And this one particular night, there was a shooting star. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the most amazing shooting star. I want to see another one. And then I saw another one. And every time I'm like, that was the most amazing shooting star, but I want one more. And it was now like 4 a.m. And I kept playing this game in my head of, I really need to go to sleep, but just when I get one more. And I remember catching myself being like, I just saw like 30 shooting stars. Isn't this enough? Like, can't I now just take it in and embody the awe and the gratitude and the presence? And it was something that I kept coming back to often of like, when can we give ourselves a compassion to say, I don't need more? It's already here. I just now got to acknowledge it, appreciate it, embody it, take it in. So in positive psychology, in coaching, in therapy, in mindfulness and meditation, share some of what your favorite ways are to take in the good.
I love what you just shared, by the way. I just want to reflect that back. Just so
Thank
powerful,
you.
eloquent, and relatable as well, right? In positive psychology, we talk about it as hedonic adaptation, right? The hedonic treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
Expressed very well in Alice in Wonderland. If you ever read Alice in Wonderland, there's a quote in there, and it's like, here, sort of in Wonderland, you have to run as fast as possible just to stay in place. And if you want to get ahead, you have to run even faster than possible. Well, it's impossible to run faster than possible. That's the very nature
Right.
of possibility, right? And so we often find ourselves doing precisely that. There's another way of saying it that I also love, which is when you find yourself unhappy or dissatisfied, you're unhappy not because you don't have what you want, but because you don't want or enjoy what you have.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't know what you have. That's the other piece of it. You don't know what you have. You're not aware of it. You don't recognize it. You don't realize it, both on the inside and the outside, right? In both. And so at the end of the day, and you express it so well, as
Yeah.
does pretty much every spiritual tradition, if you go deep enough, the problem ultimately is not what we have and what we don't have. It's how we think about what we have and what we don't have. And
Yeah.
happiness is in your mind. I used to say that happiness was in your mind, and I can say that's partly true. I would say that true happiness is no mind. It's more like presence, I guess you'd put it.
Right. That egoless. Yeah.
Yes. And which is not something that we have to accomplish, achieve, acquire in the future. It's something that we can experience in every moment, that we experience already in many moments, but we usually run past them that we miss them. But
Yeah.
it's the primary ways in which positive psychology talks about sort of solving for unhappiness. I reduced to 4 buckets. The first is sort of just doing happier things, happy activities. You might call those your happiness islands. Just identify the things that allow you to feel alive, that inspire you, that make you excited. Identify
So
those.
I'm gonna pause there for a second and add, I work with a lot of people who are like, I don't know what those are.
Yeah, it's good.
So how do we begin to do the happier things if we're like, it's been so long since I've even been able to attend to myself? What does even a happier thing look like?
Yeah, a lot of us are much more familiar with the pain. So start with your happiness deserts or valleys. Those are things you hate doing, that you don't like doing, don't make you come alive, that don't inspire you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel energized for doing or for having done.
Yeah.
And do less of those. Schedule those out of your life if you can.
Yeah.
You can do that through one of 6 ways. You can reduce or eliminate. You can outsource or delegate. You can automate or regulate. Those are 6 ways. You can also innovate. There's a 7th way. Um, you know, and you can turn those upside down, inside out, and often discover
Mm-hmm.
what you do love. I noticed that, for instance, I didn't love talking. I still don't about small, trivial things that don't seem to matter a whole lot. The weather and those kinds of things. What I ate for breakfast and for lunch, and never really excited me very much. And there's nothing wrong with talking about it. Just for me, it didn't really resonate. And I discovered, okay, how do I turn that inside out and upside down and find a happiness island hidden in these happiness deserts?
Mm.
I do love deep, meaningful conversations with other people about things that I feel really matter.
Yeah.
So I say, if you're not sure about your happiness islands, start with your happiness deserts.
I love that language. And I would also, an island, I think about a vacation, it's pleasurable, but I could also be like, well, is that lonely? Am I isolated?
Oh, this is why I love conversations with you, because you're like it's the perfect set. That leads to the second piece of it, which is, and there's only four. The second piece is happy people. When you spend more time with
Mm,
happy people, or people who at least aspire to be happy, loving people, supportive people, and less time with people who don't, right? So we can,
yeah.
all those people that maybe don't inspire happiness or love, or that you feel supported with, we might call those energy vampires. There's lots of words for them.
Right.
Really just unconscious. But yeah, spending more time with people who allow you to feel inspired and uplifted and excited to be alive, and less time with people that don't.
Which really might be some hard work because it might require us to draw really firm boundaries. It might require us to let go of certain relationships or shift our attachment to the relationship. Sometimes people can't fully be out of our life, but we can shift how we decide we're showing up. I've talked a lot in the retreat so far about naming what I'm no longer available for, but then saying, what am I available for? And so if you want to be around happy people and there's a lot of energy vampires in your life, well, you got to also do the work to get rid of the energy vampires to make more availability for more energy to come towards you.
That's right. You just nailed it. Absolutely. I love that so much. And I couldn't agree with you more. Sometimes, as an interim step, you can just commit to spending less time with unhappy or unsupportive people. You can make the interactions maybe more frequent, but shorter and
Mm-hmm.
sweeter. So you get in
Yeah.
and get out faster. I've discovered that's a real powerful key. I had a hard time, to your point, just creating boundaries with people, and even cutting people off that I knew should be cut off. Felt harsh. I was a people pleaser, and overly conscientious maybe. And I often outsource my peace, love, and happiness to those very people, right? But the idea is, if you can make your interactions more frequent in the beginning, but shorter and sweeter, get in and out faster, you'll find that over time you can sort of let the relationship die, and increasingly natural death.
Yeah, to put a tangible example to that, I have a friend who I've been friends with for almost 20 years, and she's definitely one of those energy vampires. And but she's masked in this really kind, kind of exterior, so it's hard to notice for a long time. And I would go to dinner with her, and it would be like 3 hours, what felt like a therapy session, as me being the therapist after a full day of work. There was no reciprocity to it. And I'm like, well, you're not paying me. This isn't enjoyable. And she didn't even like at least buy my drink, right? I mean, this was really hard to be around. And so I had to learn, okay, well, I can't cut her out of my life, but maybe instead of meeting for dinner, which was this very open ended, you know, date night with her, I could just go for a walk, which was time limited. At least I was getting exercise in the meantime. I was in nature, and it was at least serving something for me in a different way. And then I went from scheduling dinners to every then walks. And then it just kind of is not much there, but it took time to shift that friendship because the energy stuff was just too much.
Oh, what a
It
great
wasn't
example.
healthy.
No,
Yeah.
it's not, and it's not healthy for us, those of us who are serving or holding space, and it's not helpful for the other either. It's enabling. It's not strengthening.
Yeah.
Often feels like you're strengthening the person, or that you're supporting them. And in our heart of hearts, we are doing that. We're attempting to do that, but we often are just enabling an addict, right? It's a codependent relationship in some ways, and
Yes.
we can,
So true.
right, to sort of wean ourselves and wean the other of that. We want to make people increasingly independent of us, right? We want to make them stronger as a result of our experience. And if we don't find that we're doing that, and we don't find that they're receptive to that, continuing to, feed this hungry ghost that I'm talking about in Buddhism is
Yeah.
not serving you, and it's not serving them. And so, in this case, like so many, self-care is really other care. Taking care of yourself really
Hmm.
does support the other.
Yeah. All right. So we've got and do happier things, be around happier people. What's number
Yeah.
three?
Just keep happier thoughts. Happier thoughts, right? It's
So
and
much easier said than done.
yes, yes, and sometimes easier done than said as well, right?
Yes.
We do it all the time, and we don't necessarily recognize that we do it. So the idea here is just to tell a truthful but better feeling story about everything and everyone, simply to
Mm,
feel better. simply to feel better. Most of us, and I was the poster boy for this, most of us vet our thoughts and vet our conversations based solely on whether or not it's true. That this happened, this thing happened, or this person said this, or I do feel this way. And that's understandable and it's relatable and it's justifiable. And unfortunately, it's not very productive and it's not
Mm-hmm.
very happy and it's not very healthy. And so instead of vetting thoughts and conversations based solely or exclusively or even mainly or mostly um, based on whether or not they're true, we want to vet them based on whether or not they're true and better feeling. So in other words, you have no money. You could talk about it as though you're broke and your life sucks, or you could talk about it, in a way that says there's only up from here. If it's raining, is it a bad day? Or do you love the sunshine? Are you really looking forward to the sunshine, looking forward to being sunny again soon, and all the plans that you have for when it's sunny again? This person that you're, encountering every day who's so difficult. Sure, maybe
Yeah.
they're a difficult person, and also, man, they're a personal trainer for your unconditional peace, love, and happiness. They're an unconditional trainer, maybe a trainer for your soul for developing or establishing boundaries and sticking to those
Mm-hmm.
boundaries, learning self-love. So there are ways of thinking and talking about yourself, other people, and conditions, circumstances in the world that support you in feeling better. They're
Yeah.
constructive to help you feel what you want to feel and achieve what you want to achieve. And so the encouragement there is to do more of that.
And that, yeah, I love that part so much. And to remember that we're gonna have all the thoughts, but we can jump on board with the one that serves us best. I often talk about this analogy of a train of thoughts. And we tend to jump literally on board to the train that pulls into the station, not even knowing if the train's heading in the direction that we want to be going. We're like, oh, train here, jump on board. Right. Whereas the mindfulness piece is to just stand on that train platform, feet firmly planted, and look at, wow, that's a really big train. Oh, look at all the cars on that train. Oh, look, that's another big train. Oh, that's interesting. Look at this. Oh, here's where I want to get on.
I
Right. It's,
can't wait to give you the biggest hug. I just agree. So, I mean, I really do. It's just, I want to give everybody here a hug because, and you just nailed it. I mean, which segues perfectly into the fourth one because it
we
really
don't even
does.
have this, you guys, we don't have this scripted.
No, I promise. I promise. But this is the nature of conversations with you
Yeah.
consistently. One of the countless reasons that I love and appreciate you so much. Yes, it's the ability to non-judgmentally observe your thoughts, to
Mm,
recognize and remember that you have thoughts, but you are not thoughts. Right? You have a mind, but you're not your mind. You have a personality, but you're not your personality. You have a body, but you're not your body. You don't have consciousness, you are consciousness. You don't have awareness, you
yeah.
are awareness. And that awareness, the more that you become clear that you can, the more time you spend just observing your thoughts, sort of the way you do clouds in the sky, or listening to them the way you do music on the radio, where you're not setting out to judge the thoughts, you're not setting out to judge the music, you're not setting out to criticize or condemn, not even necessarily approve any of it. You're just
Yeah.
sort of sitting and watching as an objective onlooker or bystander. There's that. And then there's an initial piece, which you mentioned as well, which is we can go further, we can be gentle about it, and we can dismiss and ignore thoughts. We do this all the time. We do this all the
Mm-hmm.
time. We've got these crazy thoughts that come through our mind. Oh, I should eat the entire cake. But then you just dismiss it and ignore it like it's nothing. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we eat the entire cake. That's okay too. Right. But the idea is that you can dismiss and ignore thoughts that don't support you. And the dismissing and
Yeah.
ignoring honestly happens on its own as long as you don't jump on the train, as long as you don't take this train to nowheresville, um,
Yeah.
happiness and depression and upsetness and overwhelm and all that. So yes, there's this fourth piece, which is basically the recognition that we have thoughts, but we're not our thoughts, and that we
Yeah.
don't have awareness, we are awareness.
Yeah. And that's getting into kind of some deeper spiritual belief systems of how we can rise above our own present moment experience as if we are the observer of what's arising. And that's a really good practice to, embody, which is often I come back to the practice of meditation as that foundation. And meditation is, to me, the only really time that we are consciously creating the space to truly observe what's coming up for us. Otherwise, we're just so busy. So we're just going to stay in a momentum that we may know doesn't serve us, but because we haven't consciously slowed down, we can't even figure out what part of the train to not get on.
Yes.
Right. One of the things, and I love that you brought up the cake, because I was going to share a food example about thoughts that oftentimes our thoughts are actually toxic for us. They really don't serve us. They add to depression, anxiety, fear, overwhelm, unhealthy relationships. And we do know that we are what we think. And so we actually become it when we over attach to it. And so I like to give this example of like a buffet table. And if have this huge buffet table of junk food, if you literally eat all that's in front of you, you are literally ingesting toxicity into your body. And you're likely going to feel like shit pretty quickly. And then you're going to be like, oh, that really wasn't worth it, was it? And then you might be like, oh, but it wasn't so bad. And then you might justify the behavior, and then you might do it again. You're like, when am I going to learn? I keep feeling like shit whenever I eat all this junk. And our thoughts and taking them in and believing them and jumping on board sometimes is no different than ingesting them and then wondering, why don't I feel good?
Yes, yes. That's
It's like
why.
we need to go on a thought diet or like a
Oh,
thought mindful eating practice.
I love that so much. Emmett Fox used to talk a lot about that. A lot of the OG, sort of self-improvement folks would talk about things like that, and like the mental diet, thought
Yeah.
diet. I love the idea of just being, as Abraham Hicks would put it, selective sifters of
Yes.
that our experiences, and that's a really critical and important point. Like, there's a great quote out there, which is, you don't need to attend every fight you're invited to. I think that's true with our thoughts too. It's like, you don't need to participate in every thought that you're invited to, or every thought that you encounter. You can dismiss, you can ignore, you can observe it. You can decide to think something differently. We have choice there. Where there's so much choice, or it feels like there's not so much choice, is with respect to the thoughts that occur to you right away. So I remember once walking up a high building and immediately thinking, wow, what if I jumped off? I was no longer suicidal, but just the thought crossed my mind. Like, what if I just couldn't control myself and I just jumped off, kind of thing. And I remember also how quickly I was able to dismiss the thought, sort of ignore the thought. And so I couldn't control that first thought, but I could control what I did with that thought. And over time, as you stop feeding the toxic thoughts, the unsupportive and unconstructive thoughts, they start leaving you alone more and more. It's like a bully no longer is able to get your attention in the same way. They get bored, and so
there's no momentum to go on there.
That's right. That's right. And so one other thing I'll say real quickly, which you're really familiar with, is please don't beat yourself up for any of this if you don't do it well. I mean, some of us have been working at it for decades, and still we find ourselves having thoughts and things that occur to us that aren't necessarily pleasant, and you can find yourself feeding it nonetheless. And the brain, again, is built with biases that are extraordinarily helpful in lots of ways, but unhelpful in others. And negativity bias is one of them. Confirmation bias is another. Halo and horn effects. There are all kinds of sort of biases built into the brain that help us survive, but don't necessarily help us become happier. That doesn't mean that you can't do anything about them. You can do a lot of them.
So Deb asked the question, and thank you, Deb, for putting it in the chat. There was something I was going to draw upon later, so I will make sure to come back to your question a little bit towards the end as we give a little bit more space for questions. And so if anyone else has questions in the chat, please put them in. But Rob, I'm curious, everything we've talked about so far is around thoughts. So is it too simple to say our thoughts are the key thing to work with or work on or work around or work through in order to cultivate that happiness? Is it that simple? I know it's not easy, but is it really everything in your training and your coaching, thoughts being the core?
I would say it's even simpler than that. I think it's simpler than we think. Easier than we think. Meaning that unhappiness is thinking and overthinking. Happiness is not thinking, ultimately. And so I'm going to back up here for a second to make it easier for us. So I'd say that in the beginning of our journey, the easiest path, the path of the lowest hanging fruit, is to go in the order that we just described, in terms of identifying your happiness items and just trying to do happier things more regularly and do less happy things less often. Start there. Then as you sort of play with that for a while, you'll find that you're doing something that you thought was pretty happy, like laying on the beach, and you're still miserable. That recognition is invaluable. And then you say, oh, it must be the people. So then you start spending more time with happier, supportive, loving people, and less time with the other kind. And you find that you improve your happiness there. And then at some point, you're still laying on the beach with Jesus or Buddha or Lao Tzu or whoever your person is, Oprah or Brad Pitt, whatever. Okay. And you still feel like I'm miserable or I'm unhappy or I'm anxious or I'm stressed out. So then you graduate to the next level and you say, oh, wow, that's because of the thoughts that I'm entertaining in my head. I need to think in a much more supportive, constructive way. But then you find that as you improve that, you do get better. And you say you're still laying on the beach with Brad Pitt or whoever it is. Love it, and you're having what seems like positive thoughts and you're working at the positive thoughts, but it's exhausting. You begin to wear yourself out. Or sometimes, no matter how positively you think, you just can't feel any better. And so then you say, it's got to be something else. I seem to have a positive state of mind. I'm with a positive person and I'm having these positive, experiences. Why do I not feel more positive or relaxed or peaceful? At that point, you graduate to what I think or would call the most direct path. And that's the path we'll call presence, but it's a path of non-thinking. And so it's a path where you recognize that happiness is not a state of activity. It's not a state or status of relationship. It's not a state of mind. It's a state of no mind. It's a state of being, a state of beingness. And so I'd argue that at some point, all thoughts ultimately are limited. We talk about limited beliefs, but all beliefs are limited because no belief, no thought could ever possibly capture the infinity that life is, that the world is, that the universe is. So they're all limited in some way. So the idea then is to sort of go beyond all that and say, can I spend more and more moments when I'm just doing one thing, whatever this one thing is? If I'm walking, can I just walk? Do I have to also think? Do I have to also be on the phone? Do I have to also be scrolling? If I'm eating, can I just eat? If I'm listening, can I just listen without adding my color commentary on top of it? And always just waiting for the next thing to say. So the idea for me is that happiness is spending more and more time simply feeling into the peaceful aliveness that exists within your body already, always, no matter what else is going on around you, no matter who you're with, and no matter what other thoughts you're having. So it's even easier than we think. It's simpler than we think. It's more enjoyable than we think.
And with more practice, we build that muscle to be able to access that a little bit more quickly or efficiently or effectively over time. And we talked on Tuesday with Shonda Morales, who does mindfulness practice for busy moms. And she talked a lot about the triangle of awareness of what's arising. And I talk about this in my core framework, the cycle of reactivity, that we almost instantaneously have a thought, and there's no one particular order, but the order I most often see my clients go in is they have a thought, the thought being something like, I don't like this sucks, why me, why again, why others have it easier, right? So there's some sort of resistance around what's arising, and that thought almost instantaneously produces a sensation in our body. And we know this to be true of how the physiological response to fight, flight, freeze, right? We're going to have a physiological response, a release of chemicals and hormones. So we have this thought, I don't like this. And then we can notice there's this sensation in our body. Well, what's that sensation? Tight shoulders, lump in my throat, constricted chest, pit in my stomach, tension, right? And then we almost immediately also experience an emotion that we label depressed, anxious, mad, overwhelmed. And then we're like, well, that doesn't feel good. So now we're reacting to the thought we don't like, to the sensation that's hard, to the emotion that we've labeled. And now we're just in this pattern and we're spinning there. And the key, as I see it, is to have the awareness, oh, look at that thought. It's just a thought. When I don't give it more fuel, the sensation in my body might decrease a little bit around it. And therefore, maybe I'm not overwhelmed. Maybe I'm just actually tired. And it might make it a little bit lesser over time, where we can eventually kind of veer off that path into more a mindful response, in which we have a whole slew of practices, right? And even just before we got on this call, I was on with a client and he was naming a lot of struggle. And I was like, is that an accurate word? maybe you're in a habit of using the word struggle when maybe it's just busy at work. So the thought you have about busy at work, you're labeling in a way that puts on a whole different cycle,
Yes.
right? So to be able to have the awareness of this whole kind of process occurring and then be like, is this accurate?
Make no mistake, we all have an inner crackhead. It always needs another hit, and it always likes making painful things more painful. And if there's nothing else that we can do, we can certainly not make our pain more painful. And what
Yeah.
you just described is everything. You're right. Language, we use language to not only describe the world, but to inform us about the world and about ourselves. And we miss
Yeah.
that piece. We think we're just describing the world. We're never just describing the world. We're
Yeah.
actually informing ourselves about the world. And even when you bring up a memory, we know this. We know that about 50% of memories are fallible, meaning that we've added
Yeah.
things, we've moved things, we've changed things. Only half, if even that, of your memories are accurate at all. And every time you bring up a memory, you edit it in all kinds of ways that you can't see, and you save it back down in this edited way. And you usually do it in ways that over-index in the direction in which it was originally saved, right? Which means that, if you bring up a negative memory, in most cases, unless you've got an expert therapist, on hand that's going to help you not do this, you're going to double down on whatever terrible thing happened. You're going to continue to, increase the pain around it. And every time you bring it up again, it's more painful. And you wonder why, as you go to therapy or focus and think about your problems, why your problems don't shrink, for instance, in therapy or with a therapist. Instead, they grow. Why? Because we tend to focus in ways and talk about our problems and ourselves in ways that makes the pain more painful. So everything
Yeah.
you said there, just beautiful and so poignant.
Yeah. And this is what I want to segue into. And I first want to pause. And is there any more of your core frameworks? Because I want to segue into a question that was coming up for me that I hear a lot from clients that kind of tied into one of our questions we received in the chat. I want to make sure we have room for that. But I want to make sure I'm not like missing any major Rob, you know, key
No.
ism that we're gonna be like, oh man, I missed that one. I mean, you always have great ones, but
Trust me, as soon as we get off, that's when I'll have the lightning strikes.
all right, send me a text and I'll put it in tomorrow's email just in case.
Perfect.
But what you just described of sometimes how we rewrite our thoughts and our stories. I love the visualization of this being represented in the movie Inside Out, where we have those, the core memories as represented by the different colors of our emotion. And depending on our emotion, it can actually shift our core memory and our beliefs. And so this is where we're like, well, I thought that was a good experience, but now that I'm, in a bad mood right now and I'm reflecting on it, like, wow, that was actually a shitty experience. Or conversely, you know, and I saw this a lot recently that I've been very open and sharing about during my breakup with John and getting back together. We've been very vulnerable and sharing on both of our podcasts that journey and what was going on there. And part of it was he was depressed and seeing things through a negative lens. So what felt like reality wasn't actual accurate view because his emotions were clouding the vision. And it took time to recognize, wait, this isn't capital T truth. This is a clouded vision of a perception. And yet, if we get really stuck in that spiral, we can't even see the, up from down.
Oh, that's why, oh gosh, I love you saying that. And I also love the confident vulnerability that both you and John demonstrate consistently. We don't see the world, we see ourselves. We project into the world. We don't see the other, see ourselves and project them of the other. And this filter, this lens that we have on our eyes, metaphorically, is very difficult to see through. It's very difficult to see through. It's like having permanent contact lenses on, falling asleep, or something else, right? And not knowing it, kind of thing. And so your thoughts, perspectives, experiences are mood congruent. And this is why law of attraction, as much flack as sometimes it catches and gets, it's actually speaking to lots of scientific truths, which is that you get more of what you focus on. And when you're feeling down, everything will seem to be crap. And when you feel great, everything seems to be great. That's actually true. We can call that confirmation bias. We call it behavioral confirmation. Lots of ways. But the idea is that when you're in a low mood, you should distrust your low mood and you should not be making any important or significant decisions or having any important or significant conversations when you're in that low mood. Okay. And the truth is, you should try to save those conversations for when both you and the other person, it's a conversation, for instance, are in at least a place of emotional neutrality or better. When you're
Right.
in a low mood, you're not going to come up with any creative insights. You're not going to do any great problem solving, and you're not
No.
going to connect with the other very well. So it's an important point that you make, really important point that you make, which is that when you're down, learn to distrust the low mood. And if anything, even distract yourself from the problem. Put the problem on the back burner for a little while. Go do something
Yeah.
else.
Well, and it kind of comes full circle to your story of, can I just pause on this for a moment and not kill myself? and I
Yes,
don't and I don't
clearly.
mean to laugh, so I
No, it's trust me,
apologize.
it's laughable
But
to me, thank God.
but
Otherwise, we
but
cry.
it's like, can I just pause on this catastrophe temporarily and just notice the blue sky
Yeah. Oh,
for a
totally.
second?
Anything. That's right. That's why in so positive psychology we talk a lot about, as you know, like awe and wonder. Okay, like beauty. I mean, just being in a beautiful place, right? Just being in a beautiful place or being surrounded by beautiful things is so extraordinarily helpful for your happiness. Why? Because you're focused on the beauty, and in that beauty you find awe and wonder, and in your
Yeah.
awe and wonder, you return to a childlike state of innocence again. That's what we call
Yeah.
childlike faith. It's not that we
Yeah.
believe the future is going to be so great. We don't have to focus on the future at all because we're so obsessed and immersed in the present. And it's so beautiful and we're so full of awe and wonder and presence itself that we don't lose ourselves in unhappy thoughts or unhappy stories that we've made up, by the way, that we made up.
Right. I'm going to share a vision of a happy moment that all of you guys can borrow and harness and then look for in your own world. And then we'll jump into the questions. I was walking this morning, my dog and I live near a really beautiful park. And I was walking on the path and there was this massive, massive tree. And it wasn't windy out. You can tell when like, and it's windy and like all the leaves are kind of, in unison, kind of going back and forth, and you can kind of see the branches swing a little bit. This tree, I swear, all the leaves were just dancing independently. Like the branches weren't moving. And my interpretation of it, this might sound, a little cuckoo for some. I'm like, the tree is so happy I'm here right now. Like it's welcoming me. And I felt this, and like, not all the other trees were doing this, but I was in so awe of the way the leaves were moving. And it felt so good. I could have easily just missed this natural beauty of the leaves moving on the tree. But my interpretation was they're happy. Oh my God, the leaves are so happy right now. And I made this, animate experiential connection to nature, and it just felt so good. So that's why being in nature can get us out of our own downward spirals.
You nailed it, because nature is ultimately, if nothing else, full of stillness and silence. But that
Yeah.
stillness dances and that silence shouts,
Yeah.
shouts. And so the challenge and the opportunity, to your point, and you're right, you can take a tip from nature. Like all of nature is perfectly blissful except for human beings. Only people make a problem of their own existence. We literally make a problem of our own existence. All of nature experiences the same challenges that we do as human beings: loss and misfortune and illness and accident and death, all of it. But they don't make a problem of it the way that we do, right? They don't
Yeah.
sit and reflect about it and pre-live it and then relive it and then talk
And
about
then
it.
judge themselves for it. I'm a bad
Right.
tree right now.
Exactly. Feel guilt around it and stress around it, anxiety around it. It's like, no, they had a near death
Yeah.
experience with a tiger or a lion, and they were
Yeah.
freaked out for a minute, and now time to drink from the river. It's like,
Yeah.
so yes, you make a great point there, and I love that point, which is that, ultimately all of nature is blissful, and the only difference with people is that we tend, we overthink.
We overthink, we get in our own damn way. Rob, I know that you and I could talk about the next 3 hours, but I do want to get to some of these questions. So focusing on Deb's question first, she says, I love focusing on happier thoughts, but do we risk suppressing our feelings if we focus on more positive things?
Mm.
Which is something that I was going to bring up as well, as what is the difference for you and how you define it of positive thoughts versus toxic positivity, because that feels a little bit into the same kind of questioning. If I'm just negating what I actually feel, is that actually healthy?
Yeah.
So
So
kind of that two-part question of, how do I do this without suppressing my emotions? But to me, part of the answer has to be wrapped up in differentiating toxic positivity versus actual positive thoughts or gratitude.
yeah. So what we're not doing is pasting smiley stickers on empty gas tanks. That's
Mm.
what we're not doing. Um, what we are doing is feeling our feelings all the way through to the end, right? So a feeling only has really one goal, and that is to be felt all the way through. Now, the challenge with most of us is that we think we're feeling something and we think we're processing something, but we're often just ruminating and we're feeding and fueling the problem itself. And so instead of feeling something, which means this is where somatic therapy and somatic experience comes in so handy. But the idea is instead of giving all of your attention to the explanations in your brain, the story in your brain that's telling you what the feeling means, which I'd call rationalization. We can call it all kinds of things, but the idea is we're thinking about the feeling. Instead of that,
Mm-hmm.
we're focusing on the experience in the body, right? And so we're not feeding and fueling the unhappy story about the feeling. We're not thinking about the feeling. We're feeling the feeling. And to feel the feeling, you're simply noticing where it is in the body,
Mm-hmm.
and you're noticing what it feels like, what the texture is, what the color is, maybe. That's even going a little far, but we'll say the color, what the temperature is. And you're just feeling it without adding any additional commentary or judgment one way or the other. No effort to get rid of it, no effort to repress it, no
Mm-hmm.
effort to indulge in it. It's simply feeling it through. And the idea then,
Even if it's, especially when it's uncomfortable, because that's when it gets
especially,
hard to feel it, right? We've got to allow it to be okay that this feeling, it sucks right now and I hate this, but we're not trying to give the commentary. We're just staying in that sensation.
absolutely, you're just taking the sensation, and you'll notice that. And it's interesting because, and a lot of the science has found that um, emotions already are an additional. So you can ask kids. I did a morning show for a while, and in LA, it was a passion project, and we'd have kids on the show. And kids are fantastic because they just spit wisdom, and they aren't even always aware of the wisdom they spit. And so we'd have kids on the show, and one of my favorite questions to ask kids on the show, particularly if they were actors or dancers or like to perform, I'd say, "Don't you get nervous before this big event or this big, experience, the play or the movie, the TV show that you're in?" And so many of the kids, the younger, the more this was true, they'd say, "No, not at all. What do you mean? What do you mean stressful or anxious? What do you mean? I love it. It's exciting." As you ask
Mm-hmm.
older kids and you sometimes ask adults, they almost exclusively say, "Of course, I'm nervous. I'm so anxious. I'm so stressed." So what changes there, right? It's the interpretation, the evaluation of that experience. Arousal is neutral until,
Mm-hmm.
and then we take our cues from the environment and we begin to color and describe this experience with all kinds of language and words that, again, not only is meant to describe it, but also informs us of what we feel. So the
Right.
idea is to leave that all alone. You hate it, you don't hate it, who knows? Just feel it, right? Just feel it. And then at some point, if you felt it for a little while, you can bring your attention and focus back to something innocuous like your breath or
Mm-hmm.
call it objects in the room in your head. But the
Mm-hmm.
idea is not to be obsessed with the explanations in your brain, but instead be more invested in the experience in your body. And so feel your feelings. Don't just think about them.
Yeah. I love that so much. And, the way I will talk about with toxic positivity, it feels toxic when we are actually negating what's here,
Mm,
right? So if we're in the middle of a rainstorm and it's a really shitty rainstorm, to be able to be like, oh, but you know what? There's going to be a rainbow. I'll just hold out for the rainbow. If you're holding out for the rainbow, but completely dismissing the storm that you're in, pretending it doesn't exist, even if you're suffering in the midst of it, but like, I'm just going to wait for the rainbow, that's negating what's actually here. If you can
yes.
rather, if you can rather say, you know what, I'm in the middle of a really big storm right now, and this is really hard and overwhelming. And I do know when I get through it, there's going to be a rainbow on the other side.
Yes, that's a great point you're making. So the point that you're making, and you correct me if I misunderstood, um, we're going to be truthful. We're going to be vigilant about being
Mm-hmm.
truthful and just as vigilant about being better feeling, about
Yeah.
focusing on everything. So to your point, worst case scenario, we stick to the facts. It's raining. It's in fact, right. And you and I would neither, we would hopefully ideally not call it, we would not call it a shitty storm. It's raining.
Mm-hmm.
Facts. I have $0 in my account. Facts. Okay. I'm broke. Not facts. Different. Okay. I don't feel well. Facts. Worst case scenario, we can stick to the facts. No commentary, no judgment. Just stick to the facts. Just shut the hell up after that, right? Okay. Better case scenario, we can talk about it in just as truthful a way while we also focus on the better feeling aspects of it, right? So every subject, every experience really is two subjects or experiences. It's that there's a positive end of the stick, there's a negative end of the stick, and there's a sort of it's a spectrum. And so we can focus on the fact, to your point, that we have shelter in this storm, which is called a storm. Or we can focus on the fact that we don't know how long the storm is going to last, and that scares us out and freaks us out, and all kinds of other things come from that, right? So the point is, you can't focus on everything at once. If you that's literally impossible. That's the whole point of perception, is to sift out things in your experience. And so the question is, where are you directing your attention and your focus? Are you directing it on things that are going to improve and enhance your experience and actually maybe help you survive and get out of the storm? Or are you focusing on things that are going to keep you in the storm, and not only keep you in the storm, but make you suffer even more, make your pain more painful? So the question is, to your point, so stay truthful, but focus in a solution-oriented way on the aspects of your experience that will either make you feel better and or help you do better.
Yeah. And, Morgan commented and she said, within my words, but I often say, and one of the things that I often say is, it's not about the thing, it's how you relate to the thing. The thing is just the thing. It's how you're relating to that impacts your experience of it. That's going to impact your thoughts, sensations, and emotions. So it's in that relationship. So Michael had a question that says, this sounds very applicable to free time. How do you apply this to work life? Great question, Michael. I think he typed that up when Rob was talking about being on the beach with Brad Pitt.
Don't blame him. Yeah. So one thing I'll say back to your point, just the earlier point, because it was so good. You're right. It's like happy people and unhappy people have pretty much the same thoughts. What's different is the way they relate to the thoughts. You just nailed it. So I love that. And then in terms of work life, well, I think it pretty much operates the same way. We might use different language. But so in terms of happiness islands, ideally, you would spend most of your work life, if you can, on your overlapping islands. Those are activities that you both love for their own sake, happiness islands, and activities that you're effortlessly good at, success islands. Those activities that are on both lists are where you can access most easily flow state. That's your personal brand. That's your competitive or comparative advantage. That's your unique value proposition in life. In order to get there, you want to identify your happiness deserts, success deserts, things you don't like for their own sake, only because of what they get you. Success deserts, activities that you're either good at, but it takes you too much time, energy, and effort to be good at them, or below, you suck at them. All those activities you want to reduce, eliminate, outsource, delegate, reduce, eliminate, or innovate, right? So in other words, get them off your plate, okay? So that's the first. In terms of the happy people, shorter meetings, fewer meetings, get in and get out. And then in terms of happiness thoughts, happy thoughts, you're just wanting to tell truthful, better feeling stories about everything and everyone. By the way, it works really well at work, even probably more so at work. It's a place where it's even more acceptable because you don't burn bridges that way. It seems like you're playing politics, but you're just trying to be happy. In terms of the no thinking, well, that's presence again. So when we talk about executive presence, one thing that people that have a lot of executive presence all have in common is that they are not only very present and attentive, their mind is where their body is, but they're also able to not think while their body is where they are. They're just present, not lost in their own discursive thought.
Yeah, thank you for that. You said so much wisdom in that. I need to go back and hit rewind and slow down because you had so much in there with all of that. And it makes me think of when I was a school counselor many years ago, there was a boy who had come in, he was in 7th grade, and he was really, really overwhelmed because he was given 75 math problems for the week. And he struggled in math and he didn't get along with the math teacher. So he had some emotional component on top of an academic challenge. And he already had figured out he could do 15 math problems a night, but even that was too overwhelming. And we talked earlier in the week of just kind of understanding when our emotional brain fires off, it shuts down our executive functioning. So when that emotional brain is activated, we can't access our tools, right? So it's going to make whatever task is in front of us harder if we're now activated in our nervous system. And the last thing anyone's ever going to do when you say calm down is calm down. So you're not just going to get over to be able to focus better. And many people feel like, well, if I just push harder, I'll get it done better. But now we're even more activated, more offline from our tools. Anyhow, so I said to this boy, I said, you don't have to do 15 math problems. And he goes, yeah, I do. And I'm like, no, 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 you don't. And we got into this playful argument. I said, you only ever have to do one. And when you're done with that one, well, then you just do one more. And when you're done with that one, you just have to do one more. If you sit down and be like, fuck, I've got 15 or 75 emails to get back to. No, you have one email to get back to. That's it. You know, I used to be quite overweight. I've lost over 70 pounds from my highest weight. And some of that was on my own. Some I did through Weight Watchers. When I joined Weight Watchers, I had like 35 pounds to go to get to my goal. I'm like, I can't do that. It felt too big. It caused my own suffering of limiting beliefs of what I was capable of. But then I realized, well, I can lose 1 pound. I just got to do that 35 times. So it's shifting the relationship to it that can quiet down the mind, create calmer sensations in the body, not make the emotions feel so magnified. So Michael, you know, my answer to your question is work or life, it's all the same practice. And in fact, yeah, and last thing I'll say on that is, you know, me focusing on mindfulness and these tools, I've always said, whether you're sitting in cancer or sitting in traffic or dealing with cancer, the tools are the exact same. So it's what you're bringing to the environment, not what the environment is affecting you. So I hope that was helpful, Michael.
And just three little quotes you remind me of. One is, this is why it's said that you're not in the world is in you. The other quote I love, if you're going in the wrong direction, increasing your momentum will not help. So it's like if you're stuck in mud, hitting the gas harder will not help. It just drives you deeper into the mud. And the last is a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. You know, he said, you don't need to see the whole staircase, you just need to see the next step. Another way of saying that is you don't need to leap or jump the whole staircase, you just need to take the next step.
Yeah.
That is something I learned across country, because every time I thought about, oh, I gotta run all these miles, it would drive me nuts. It's like, no, Rob, just left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot.
We overcomplicate it. So Cody had a question for Rob. Cody, did you want to come on and put on your microphone or camera?
How we doing,
Cody,
Robert?
what's
It's
up, buddy?
good to talk to you again, man.
Yes, it is. Good to see you.
Hey, loving this so far. I just wanted to ask one last question here. Um, you know, you've been my life coach for 10 months. I mean, it's completely changed my life. You've helped me find, inner love, peace, joy. And so, you emphasize embracing every moment and the beauty of self-growth, but I want to see, how can one intertwine the joy of self-improvement? Because it's a challenging thing. You have to do a lot of work, you have to commit to yourself. But how can one intertwine the joy of self-improvement with pursuing their passions, especially when the journey, feels tough or clouded, that way that they can unearth this deep, sustained happiness in their own evolution?
What a phenomenal
I
question.
love the question, Cody.
Yeah. You want to jump on that one?
Nope, you go first. I have a thought, but you go first.
I would say first is by recognizing that the journey is the professional journey itself is also the self-improvement journey. You can't divorce them or separate them out anyway, right? Like the obstacle is the journey kind of thing, the obstacle is the way. And so I'd say the first thing is you don't need to do it all at once. You just decide one thing that you're going to focus on and work on at a time. Bruce Lee was famous for saying, I fear not the person who has practiced 1,000 kicks once, but the one who's practiced one kick 1,000 times. Like that person's lethal. So the idea is you can take any one principle. I remember taking just the principle of presence, for instance, and say, okay, this is my year of presence. And I'm going to spend time just being increasingly present everywhere, especially at work. Every moment I'm going to slow down, I'm going to take my time. Or another year, I remember it was like, I'm just going to learn to tell truthful, better feeling stories this whole year. I'm going to work on this one task with this one activity. And the idea was I didn't need to read another book or watch another podcast or listen to another workshop or another anything. I could simply take this one thing that I already knew and just apply it more consistently to my life until I became sort of a master of it. And you're
building that muscle.
Yes, it's a mind blowing how it leads you to all other things that you need to learn. You apply the presence thing and it leads you to something else, and that leads you to something else. And so I'd say just take or practice one kick 1,000 times, but practice it
Yeah.
everywhere with everyone for the joy of it alone.
Yeah. And I it really adds on to that you can only do one thing at a time. So the overwhelm comes in the expectation of all the things. And Cody, I would add to that, can we let it be okay if the journey's tough? We maybe want more joy in the journey of that self-improvement and, have an expectation around finding our passions. And when those moments are tough, even when they're, like you said, going into really deep parts of ourselves that's going to unearth it, it can be really, really hard. And maybe there's a story we're telling ourselves that this should be more fun on the journey. And one of the things that, I love to ask is, what's the story you're telling yourself? Well, maybe the story I'm telling myself is, this should have been easier. Or the story I'm telling myself is, why is this taking so long? This should have been quicker, or I should have enjoyed it more. So then I always will start off by asking, what's the story I'm telling myself? And there's usually some answer there, right? That feels like capital T truth. And then I'll say, says who? Like, says who said that was going to be the way? It was all based on an arbitrary thought that I had in the beginning. So it's helpful to get clear on what's the energy you're bringing into the journey and the process. Because if the story I'm telling myself is, this self-exploration journey toward happiness is going to be insightful and fun, and I'm going to learn so much and I'm going to enjoy it. Well, A says who? That's an assumption based on maybe other people's experiences or perceptions of seeing other people's ease of success without seeing all the hard work. And recognize, can I let it be okay, whatever it is in this moment, knowing the emotion in this moment is not permanent? Can I have compassion around that? Can I have some expansiveness? Can I release my grip on it so tightly? But I don't want it this way, but I don't want it this way. Okay, well, when we do that, we're increasing our suffering. So it's an ongoing practice.
I love that so much. Right. So there's a quote. I worked in the addiction world for a while, as a counselor. And one of my favorite expressions that they would share there often was, your best thinking got you here. Your best thinking landed you in a rehab place. Your best thinking landed you in depression or suicidal ideation or bankruptcy or whatever it is that day, overwhelm. Your best thinking, and you still are so committed to and confident about and faithful and trusting in your thoughts, kind of thing, right? And so the idea was, and this is where I think maybe there's an invitation for some of us to dive more deeply into whatever your spiritual, mission is, because there's a transfer of responsibility that happens there that can be so helpful. And that's where you hear things like, take no anxious thought for your life and things like that. There's another way of saying it that's much simpler that I just love from Slumdog Billionaire, if you saw it, that in the end, everything will be okay. And if it's not okay, it's not yet the end, right? That's the other thing. It's just to remember that everything will be okay.
Yeah. I'm going to take this one last question Michael just put up. It's a really important one. So he says, what if your physical sensations drive your unhappiness more than your thoughts? So for me, I'm going to come to answer that, from the foundation of mindfulness and meditation. Meditation allows us to learn to be with what is, even when what is uncomfortable. And if we're talking like actual physical pain, even how we name it, how we breathe through it, how we label it is going to impact our experience of that. And with mindfulness, and we know from practices of mindfulness-based stress reduction, that we literally can rewire not only our brain, but our bodies on a cellular level and how we relate to what is arising. And, the research around this is so prolific the more and more time is going on around how our stress and our anxiety affects our physical health. And so if we're dealing with difficult sensations in a way that's adding to our own discomfort, part of the thing is through acceptance. Can I accept that this physical sensation is really painful? Can I breathe through it? Can I take it just one breath at a time and not have the commentary of, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. Or I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it. Or I'm so depressed, I'm so, it's, again, we're ingesting more toxicity rather than being through acceptance. So for me, part of that, physical sensations, whether it's depressive emotions, anxiety, physical pain in the body, to me, one of the key foundations for getting through that towards the path of happiness is, can I accept what's here? And people often say, well, how do I accept what I don't like? I hate this. Why should I accept it? But then we have to remember that not accepting it doesn't mean you like it. It just means we're not in resistance to it anymore. Or accepting it doesn't mean you like it. It just means you're not resisting. Because it's the resistance that's causing more depression, anxiety, overwhelm. Sensation's just sensation. Like Rob said earlier, fear and excitement, or anxiety and excitement, have the same physiological sensations in the body. It's how we're in a habit of naming it. So is there anything you would add before we wrap up on that one, Rob?
We share a brain. We certainly share a heart. I can tell you that much. I mean, just what you said, the first thing that came to mind was, for me, is that I worked with people with had chronic pain for a while, and it can be one of the most upsetting, overwhelming experiences ever. And I have such deep empathy, concern for folks going through or experiencing chronic pain. And what Jory said just now is so correct. The physical sensations can and very well and likely are painful, especially if it's a physical like pain. There's a difference between what I might call pain and psychological and emotional suffering, which we might call unhappiness. The physical sensations don't drive the unhappiness. Your resistance to the physical sensations drive or create the unhappiness.
Yeah.
Happiness is psychological and emotional in nature, maybe even spiritual in nature. The physical pain that you're experiencing, purely physical and physiological in nature. And one last thing I'll say is, you may have seen a book a long time ago. I think it was Richard Davidson, maybe a researcher, and the Dalai Lama wrote a book together, and they basically found that, if you meditate, that master or expert meditators experience pain differently than everybody else. So they put their hand in a bucket of ice cold water and they just leave it in there. And the expert meditators just basically felt like very little, not much at all, no discomfort. There wasn't any discomfort. Nothing was showing up even in their physiological signs. Whereas everybody else was like, ow, that's terrible. I'm going to get my arm out of there. And so you'd be surprised how much progress you could make, both with the unhappiness and with the physical sensations, if you spend or use those experiences to dive deeper into your happiness practice, your spiritual practice, your meditation practice, call it what you want, but a practice that helps you to see through the stories that you create in your head, that happiness that you think you feel in your mind and body.
Yeah. And I'll wrap up by sharing a quick story, because this ties into how I want to, kind of wrap this conversation up. Years ago, I was on a 7-day mindfulness retreat with Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction and really responsible for bringing these ancient contemplative practices into modern secular and medical communities, right? And I was going into this retreat really having the attachment to an outcome that I was going to have these amazing insights and revelations of my life and all these deep learnings. And we had a day and a half in complete silence, where it was like meditation for 16 hours a day. And I thought, oh, this is gonna be like therapy for years in a day and a half. Like, that was what I really thought was gonna come for me. And what actually resulted was a lot of physical pain from sitting in meditation. And I decided to just breathe and send my breath to the part of my body that was hurting. And during walking meditation, I would just breathe into every step as if it was a massage for my muscles. And the most amazing thing happened at the end of that retreat. I had no more physical pain. I was really able to breathe through without resistance, quieting down that physical pain versus increasing it. And then I took a challenge for months of how long could I go without taking any Advil. And it was quite a long time of how I was relating to it all. And, so a lot of what we're talking about here is a foundational practice. We know, Rob and I have been practicing these tools and teaching these tools for a very long time. And I'll speak for myself. I know I sure as hell still get stuck. So if I get stuck after years of practice and teaching this, that means anyone who's just starting is going to get stuck. So just have compassion for yourself around this. Is a roadmap And yet this is also a journey, right? And for me in my work, and the foundation truly is mindfulness and meditation, because without that self-knowledge of going inward and the awareness, then it's harder to apply it in real time in everyday moments. So I know, Rob, we need to wrap up because we'll keep talking.
The last thing I'll say to that one, Ramana Maharshi, one of my favorite spiritual teachers of all time, was once asked a very similar question, and he said, and he was known for being enlightened. He was one of those people that didn't try to create a following. People just found him way out in the woods. Like they just felt his, peaceful presence. And he was asked this question, and he said, even him, even he had to remain vigilant his entire life around it. And that doesn't need to be something that you worry about, concern yourself with, because as was shared earlier, it's just about this moment, this breath, this thought, and you can enjoy the experience. In fact, you're invited to enjoy it. It doesn't need to be hard work. Just
look for the leaves that are dancing as you walk by. They're just saying hi. Rob, I absolutely adore you, and I always love chatting with you. Thank you so much for completing, this week of guest experts, and I so appreciate your time and your wisdom. And thank you guys who showed up live, for the great engagement and conversation. For those who are catching us on the replay, I hope you got a lot out of this. And tomorrow I'll be wrapping up and weaving together everyone's insights and wisdom from the week, but also kind of give a continued roadmap of now what? Like, this is all great, but now what do I do with this? So that's what I'm going to be wrapping up tomorrow's call with. And in the meantime, I just wish you all to be present, be well, stay aware, non-judgmental, compassion, self-acceptance, love, all the good stuff. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, guys. You're the best. Best all time. All time best, Robert.
What a gift. Thank you so much.
He is. Take care.
Good night.